It's 1995, and Michael Mann drops a bomb on the crime film world with Heat. It's not just a heist movie, not just a cops and robbers flick. It's a magnum opus of obsession, professionalism, and the very thin line that separates the men who uphold the law and the men who break it. This isn't just any crime film, it's the crime film. Michael Mann as a filmmaker has become a seminal figure in American cinema, and his influence is felt no greater than in the crime drama genre. So much so that in nearly 30 years since Heat's release in 1995, a subgenre of action films has been rising. I've collected these films in a list, and I've dubbed it Heatsploitation. Here are some key examples. Heat, of course. 1998's Ronin. 2008's The Dark Knight. 2009's Public Enemies. 2010's The Town. 2010's Inception. 2011's Fast Five. 2016's 999. 2018's Den of Thieves. 2021's The Wrath of Man. And 2022's Ambulance. These films aren't an exhaustive list, but they stand as some of the clearest examples of how Heat's DNA has infiltrated modern action crime cinema. But before we dive into these films, let's discuss what Heatsploitation even means. Heatsploitation, noun. Or is it a verb? I don't know. Let's call it a noun that can also be verbed. I would define it as a category of films released in the wake of Heat that in some way utilize the aesthetic or thematic elements of it as a shorthand in their storytelling. The similarities may manifest visually in its subject matter, its tone, or even in the story structure, but typically they are in conversation in some way, at least deeper than surface level, with the legacy of Michael Mann's Heat. This isn't meant to put these films down or diminish their own artistry by simply referring to them as knockoffs. Instead, I was mainly motivated to organize this list because I was fascinated by this subgenre, and I was subconsciously seeking it out in my own movie viewing. And I wanted to share that with anyone else who was doing the same. Heat is about a lot of things, but at its core, it's about the order of chaos, embodied by its characters Neil McCauley and Vincent Hanna. McCauley is a disciplined career criminal who runs his crew with military precision, while Hanna is the equally obsessive detective from Robbery Homicide, hunting him. Both men are consumed by their work, and that sense of professionalism, taken to the extreme, forms the crux of the film. What makes Heat exceptional doesn't just stop at the expertly crafted heist sequences or the diner scenes. It's the emotional undercurrent that drives these men and everything in between. McCauley and Hanna are the same. They are professional to a fault, and that is their biggest character flaw, while also being their defining characteristic. Their personal lives exist. They feel like real people, but they're so caught up in their outward-facing lives. What's at home, what they're protecting, is a mess. It's this tension between personal desire and professional obligation that continues to resonate with audiences and filmmakers alike. It's also the thing that some films that merely attempt to ape Heat forget. They take Hanna and McCauley's aesthetic, forgetting the interior conflict that makes it all the more compelling. John Frankenheimer's Ronin is the first one in our Heatsploitation list, and it somehow might resemble Heat the least in a way. And that's weird of me to say, considering what the poster looks like. But structurally, Ronin most closely resembles something like Mission Impossible, rather than the steely, cold bank robber movie we know and love. Being that Frankenheimer also directed The Manchurian Candidate, The Second French Connection, and was a contemporary of Jean-Pierre Melville, whose work clearly inspired the Mission films and Michael Mann himself, it would be hard to argue that the man was ripping off Heat so close to its release. But why include it in this list if I'm going to discuss how different it is? That's because it's the contemporary film that is most discussed in relation to Heat. And there's quite a lot that does feel like a direct product of Heat's influence so early on. For one, the marketing of this film leans on the familiarity of audiences to De Niro's most recent crime thriller, as well as his character shtick operating with a military level of professionalism to steal something. Early on, he even says,
"I never walk into a place I don't know how to walk out of,"
which is practically a few words off of McCauley's iconic line about feeling the heat around the corner. But 10 years later, Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight channels Heat directly. And it's no secret, its opening sequence is ripped straight from the cinematic language of Heat, down to even casting William Fichtner as a direct nod. But it doesn't just end there. Nolan has cited Heat as a major inspiration on the rest of the film, even screening it at the start of production. The sprawling urban environment of Gotham echoes Mann's Los Angeles, and the cat and mouse dynamic between Batman and the Joker is a heightened version of the Macaulay-Hannah relationship. The film even features a scene almost halfway through where the two face off at a table across from one another. While The Dark Knight pushes the stakes beyond personal, its core dynamic remains rooted in the obsessive professionalism and steely stylishness that defines Heat. Ben Affleck's The Town wears its Heat influences proudly, so much so that the film is explicitly featured on screen during the movie. It features a crew of professional criminals operating in Boston's Charlestown neighborhood, led by Doug McCrae, played by Affleck. While the town shares the tactical precision and intense heist sequences of Heat, it injects a sort of blue-collar Boston affectation. There's also a focus, even if not as large as there is on Hannah, on John Hamm's FBI agent Adam Frawley. But just like how Mann captures the LAPD, there is an intensity to the hunt and a criminal attitude to the way the cops carry out their work. McCrae, not totally unlike Macaulay, is torn between his criminal life and his desire to escape it, especially when he forms a relationship with a woman that his crew once took hostage. The personal stakes here are as immediate as in Heat. There seems to also be some more commentary on gentrification and local issues that Affleck himself is more tied to. But the film's commitment to the professional code and brotherhood feels like a direct evolution of Mann's work. Speaking of Mann's work, Mann himself revisits similar territory in Public Enemies. Set in the historical context of John Dillinger's downfall, the cat and mouse dynamic is still present, this time between Dillinger and FBI agent Melvin Purvis. Like Macaulay and Hannah, these two are professionals, dedicated to their craft, and their eventual confrontation feels as inevitable as any in Mann's films. What Mann does here is utilize familiar structure to transport the audience to another time, to ground us in the reality of these larger-than-life historical figures. With Mann using shorthand of his own work, he is able to take the films to a new realm about aging and the way a professional can be phased out of their own field by not staying on the cutting edge, something that is felt in every aspect of the film, from its movie star cast to its controversial digital cinematography. While Inception might not seem like an obvious entry into the Heatsploitation conversation, Christopher Nolan himself might even argue he has another film that fits here better. But this cerebral heist film edges through with its exploration of its protagonist. Cobb and his crew are, in essence, professional criminals, but instead of robbing banks, they infiltrate mines. Nolan's exploration of Cobb's obsession with his past, his inability to let go of his deceased wife, and his fixation on one last job brings us back to Heat's core themes of obsession and personal cost. In Inception, the stakes are not only Cobb's freedom, but his grasp on reality, a weighty reflection on how professionals in Heatsploitation often lose themselves in their work, and, in my opinion, a fitting way for Nolan to return to this list. One of the more fascinating and ever-relevant elements of Heatsploitation is the increasingly blurred line between law enforcement and criminality. This is particularly evident in 999, where cops themselves make up the crew pulling off the heists. Much like in Heat, the professionals on both sides of the law are tactical, calculating, and willing to obliterate ethical lines in order to achieve their goals. Den of Thieves pushes this concept even further. Gerard Butler's Nick Flanagan is a lawman, but he's as ruthless and morally bankrupt as the criminals he's chasing, arguably even worse. They literally call him the
gangster cop in the flesh.
And at the time of writing, the trailer for Den of Thieves 2 Pantera has just dropped, and the premise is that he is just dropping the cop shtick and just joining the bank robbers. His approach to justice is indistinguishable from the tactics used by the bank robbers he's hunting, and the militarization of the LAPD feels like a natural escalation of the themes in Heat. This militarization is taken to the extreme in Michael Bay's Ambulance, where the LAPD operates like a paramilitary unit. Bay's film is a relentless action spectacle shot like Black Hawk Down is ripping through the streets of LA. But underneath all the explosions and car chases is a sharp critique of the increased militarized police forces we see today. It has also felt like it was a matter of time before Bay made his LA bank robber film, after years of being compared or confused with Michael Mann, until he made those Transformers flicks. Though, these themes of over-militarization of the police are found in all of these films. As stated earlier in regard to The Town, the nature of these characteristic shootouts are inherently inhumane and violent. The fact that the heroes in these films are putting people in harm's way and straight up shooting them at times shows the disregard for human lives in the faces of the egos of authoritarians. While some Heatsploitation films aim for realism, others, like Fast 5, take Heat's formula and inject it with pure adrenaline, and possibly a pure form of something else. Dom Toretto and his crew might as well be superheroes, pulling off stunts and heists that defy physics. And even within this bombastic, over-the-top universe, the DNA of Heat is still visible. Professionalism, loyalty, and in 5 in particular, the series goes from doing a point break again to doing a new thing altogether. Fast 5 takes the bones of Heat and stretches them into a larger-than-life territory, but the spirit remains. It's the thought that counts. Guy Ritchie's Wrath of Man offers a darker, more nihilistic take on the Heat-inspired heist film. Jason Statham's character is driven by personal revenge, and while he operates with the same cold precision as Macaulay, his motivations are far more emotional and personal. The film features a lot of the aesthetic aspects of Heat, the crew, the ice-cold operatic tone. However, in some of Ritchie's most recent work, that operatic, dramatic tone has seemingly evolved into its own kind of thing. You should watch The Covenant. And it comes together in a pulpy, stylish romp that I fully welcome in the wake of Guy Ritchie's post-Disney blank check era. What's fascinating about Heatsploitation is how these films have continued to evolve the conversation started by Michael Mann's Heat. These aren't mere imitations or knockoffs. Each one takes something differently from Heat and pushes it in a new direction, whether it's the intense professionalism, the cat and mouse game at the heart of the story, or the way law enforcement is portrayed as being just as corrupt and violent as the criminals. While some films like Inception or Fast 5 might seem like outliers, their thematic concerns, obsession, loyalty, personal costs, even if it's just cool to see people rob banks, are very much in line with what Heat set out to explore. As a filmmaker and a cinephile, the development of this category of films fascinates me. The films on this list, some direct descendants of Heat, others more distant relatives, represent an ongoing conversation about crime and the way we perceive the police in real life and in cinema. And while not every film in the Heatsploitation canon is a masterpiece, they all contribute something unique to the genre. They aren't just living in Heat's shadow. They're part of a legacy, one that continues to grow, evolve, and challenge the way we think about crime films today.